But let's start. Mainstreaming, acceleration, policy support. As always in the UN, we come up with a very long title for something and immediately create a short abbreviation, MAPS. Well, I'm going to go even shorter because I just want to talk about the first two letters of that acronym, the M and the A. And unlike different from our other presenters, what I really want to do is to sow some seeds for thoughts, things to digest, which in a session straight after lunch is really a fitting thing to do. So let me start with mainstreaming. Mainstreaming is a nice way of saying, let's try and reposition something, programs or priorities, so that they become the norm rather than the exception. An inherent part of our day-to-day practice rather than an exception. And of course, in the context of the SDGs, it's absolutely essential that we do embed the SDG targets into the national development agendas and the development planning program. But the first question I really want to ask ourselves is, are we sure that we're actually mainstreaming all the targets that we need to achieve those national development plans? And I want to make the case really that if we fail to mainstream the social development agenda and its related targets into the national development agenda, which, particularly in middle-income countries, is often heavily focused on economic success and economic progress, then I actually feel that we will fall short of turning those economic visions into reality. And we know better, I think, than ever before that so many of the social sector indicators within the SDGs are not the outcomes of sustainable development, but they're actually the determinants of sustainable development. Improved child health, improved child nutrition and stimulation are especially important in those early formative years and are connected to improved learning outcomes and learning capacity of children. And if you have strong educational outcomes, even at the primary school level, we know that children have a much better chance of having meaningful jobs and sustained incomes in adult life. If we protect adolescents from violence and from abuse, in a period of life when their emotional development is especially critical, which we know will shape their long-term view of the world, their long-term behaviours into adulthood, then we improve the likelihood of social cohesion and we reduce the likelihood that those same adolescents will replicate the violence and exploitation they've witnessed when they become adults, creating huge social burdens on any country. So just taking those few examples alone, we can see that these social indicators really influence the chances of a nation having an appropriately skilled workforce, a healthy population, being more productive, and a national budget with reduced demands for social welfare, social services, and other expenditures, and therefore increased revenues, lower budget deficits, and so on. And I think if we overlook that connection between the social development agenda and the economic development agenda within the context of the SDGs and their related targets, then we overlook the fundamental and essential connection between social advancement and economic success in any country. And coming back to the maps, I think a good maps exercise should help us to understand the connection between the social development agenda and the economic. And I actually don't think I've heard enough in the last couple of days, I'm afraid, about the social development agenda. And I'm glad that a couple of our colleagues on the panel did mention that today. But I think we need to talk about it a lot more when we look at programs and exercises like maps. Because if we use maps well and we ensure that that those who are engaging around the maps process are really representative of the full development spectrum, then I think we avoid falling into the trap that's there of letting the national development targets to sustain economic growth alone drive the focus of the SDGs at the national level. So we need to take a comprehensive view of what contributes to national sustained economic development, because by achieving the social sector indicators, we're going to increase the likelihood of economic success. And we often hear the argument, well, if we don't have economic progress, then there are constraints on the budgets to develop the social sectors. Whereas I would argue that if you don't adjust national spending plans to focus on those critical social sectors, like early childhood care, parenting support, primary and secondary education, adolescent skills development, physical and mental health care, packages of social service support and so on, then you're never going to really achieve the optimum economic growth that you desire. It's always going to be fall backwards. A quick word on acceleration. The MAPS process, I think, takes us a long way to having a better understanding of the barriers and the obstacles to national development so that we can target our responses much more effectively and with a better sense of prioritization. And that's where data analysis becomes really important. And one of the shortcomings of the Millennium Development Goals was that there was a preoccupation with national averages. And we didn't really understand that that was hiding underlying inequities and made it much more difficult to deliver sustainable responses. But we can use the MAPS process to help us identify not just the systemic barriers, but also to identify better the segments of the population who need priority investment, whether that's children, people with disabilities, girls and women, rural communities, the urban poor, youth and adolescents, or the aging segments of the population. And by doing that, we can ensure that the SDG acceleration platforms that emerge from the MAPS are built around disaggregated data, so that we're not only identifying where we can maximize returns on investment, but we can actually ensure that those who need that investment are the ones who are most benefiting from the Sustainable Development Agenda. And we know from our experience that if we target those who are most left behind, then progress overall can be accelerated for whole communities. For example, if we invest in inclusive education for children with disabilities, the whole classroom of children benefits because we're investing in teacher skills and more child-focused educational methodology. If we invest in early childhood nutrition and healthcare, it reduces the burden of the primary healthcare system and services, which frees up capacity and resources to deal with other health issues which are maybe more challenging for a country to deal with. So my plea really is we begin to use MAPS as a tool for this sector analysis and priority setting, is that we drill down through the data to determine where the needs are the greatest and where the impact of our investments can be the greatest, and use this disaggregated analysis to shape the accelerated platform for the country. And that's very much what we've been doing here in Azerbaijan, looking at things like early childhood development and social service reform, as Ben mentioned in his presentation. And I think this is how processes like MAPS can really not only ensure that we have an aligned approach to integrating SDG targets into the national development plans, but we come back to the fundamental principle of the SDGs, which is to leave no one behind. And I think if we can get this thinking right, if we can get the disaggregation of our data right, and we can really understand the connection between social development and economic development, then we will be much better at policy making, priority setting, and programming. And in the true spirit of acronyms, I've now given you another definition of the P in MAPS. So thank you very much.